the border region separating India and Myanmar. This large river, 600 meters wide at places, runs alongside 2,000-meter-high mountains. In 1944, the Imperial Japanese Army carried out an unprecedented operation here. Troops crossed this rugged mountainous region in a 470-kilometer march. Their aim was the northeast Indian town of Imphal. In the ferocious fighting and disastrous retreat, about 30,000 men lost their lives. The Battle of Imphal is considered one of the most reckless for the Japanese in all of World War II. Over 10 hours of footage remains, shot by the British Army who fought against Japan. A strategy aimed at a short, decisive battle of 3 weeks extended to several months. Due to poor logistical planning, soldiers succumbed to disease and starvation in the jungle.
水を飲むでしょ。雨今適齢で1日か2日ですよ。2日でみんな死んじゃう。日本人同士でね、殺してさ、肉切って食われちゃうよ。
The battle was fought in what is said to be the wettest place on earth. A path on which doomed soldiers collapsed and died became known as the Road of Bones. Unable to return across the large, muddy river, survivors too lost their lives.
置きっぱなしで来ちゃってるからね。それが今一番寂しいですから。
Ignoring the reality on the battlefield, the Army's senior command pressed on with the operation. Even afterwards, they shunned responsibility for the debacle. A huge amount of previously undisclosed material concerning the Battle of Imphal was discovered in the UK. Immediately after the war, the Allied forces interrogated 17 people, including top brass and local commanders. Records reveal many simply justified their actions.
I was of the conviction that an offensive operation against India was the most effective plan to turn the tide of war.
For the psychological value of keeping a foothold in India, it was decided to continue it at all costs.
Details concerning Imperial Japanese Army operations emerge from new material and soldiers' testimonies. Many souls met a sorrowful end in this land. This is their story.
Myanmar is located on the west side of the Indo-Chinese peninsula. It was formerly known as Burma. The great Chindwin River runs along the border with India. The Battle of Imphal played out in 1944. The plan was for Japanese forces based in Burma to capture a strategic British army based in the Indian city. Many stone monuments overlook a southern village leading to the river. The names of Japanese soldiers who lost their lives in the Battle of Imphal and other operations in the Burma theater are inscribed here. Due to an active armed insurgency around the border region, outsiders can only enter up to this point. Since the war, former soldiers have stood here looking out over old battlefields, offering prayers to their fallen comrades. NHK obtained special permission to enter these highly restricted areas. And for the first time, we followed the entire route of the failed operation. There, battle scars remain after more than 7 decades.
Galpini na the pante tingka akhe ta kiwal na buan analo na dinga ndo dia kapua kai
Awai wala lo yong ai bia na dong mai ya.
A location 150 kilometers from Imphal, where the Japanese army fled. This road, like many others around here, didn't even exist then. Ethnic minority communities dot the area.
Na hangu da ba zo de. Se nu zo ke tu ke ro zo le di, ke ro nu ha di zo wo zo ha nu zo ke hangu ke mo. Ke pa ko ta nu na nu wo da. Ma do bi di mo ko ne chak la no ji ko. Ma puk de la me hai ma le ko. Dum hai ne dum thawe.
A 1,000 Japanese troops were killed or wounded in British attacks in this area.
Dima lama wingen di bari tuide sita uniform lulu miane piro ni ani tua yan do pyok koi tua re.
Many villagers still remember the battle that brought about so many casualties.
How reckless was the Battle of Imphal? NHK obtained a list of nearly half of the 30,000 Japanese who died in the operation. We then identified the location, date, and time of each person's death and recorded it on a map. The operation was launched in March 1944. The plan was to capture the city in 3 weeks. However, the Japanese army met fierce resistance from British defenses and never reached their objective. About 4 months after the launch, with many dead and wounded, the operation was called off. Those who died after the decision was announced are shown in blue. Nearly all succumbed to sickness or starvation. In December, 6 months after the operation was aborted, the withdrawal had yet to be completed. Despite the horrific battle, 60% of the dead met their end during the retreat. Tasked with seeing the operation through was Lieutenant General Renya Mutaguchi. Mutaguchi was well known for his aggressive tactical leadership, directing battles as a regiment commander. Troops under his command played a major part in the 1937 Marco Polo Bridge incident, triggering the Second Sino-Japanese War. To learn more, we paid a visit to Mutaguchi's grandson. A great many items remain from the war years, including numerous medals he was awarded. The grandson agreed to an interview for the very first time. He too wanted to know more about events of that period.
父はアンチでしたけども、やっぱり歴史物として捨ててはいけないという思いがあったんじゃないでしょうかね。見たくはないけども捨ててはいけない。
In 1965, 20 years after the war, Mutaguchi set down his memoirs on tape.
"私の作戦復帰の動機は、大東亜戦争に勝ちたいという一念に他にません。戦争全般の形勢が各方面とも不審である当時の形勢に鑑み、作戦指導いかんによっては戦争全局を好転させたいとの念願を持っていたからである。
Planning for the Battle of Imphal proceeded based on incredibly ambiguous decision-making. December 1941. Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor was the opening salvo against Allied countries, including the United States and United Kingdom. The overall objective was the creation of an economic and political bloc in Asia free of Western influence. The following January, Japanese troops advanced into British Burma, gaining control of the whole country in a matter of months. Nearly the entire area envisioned in the co-prosperity sphere had been secured. The British Army fled to India. Imperial General Headquarters began discussing an invasion of India to capitalize on its victory. At this time, Mutaguchi was serving as commander of the 18th Division defending northern Burma. He called the plan difficult to execute due to a number of factors, including weather and terrain. Imperial Headquarters put the plan on hold. It resurfaced, however, as the tide of war changed in the Pacific. In early 1943, Japan suffered a series of defeats to US forces. The front was drawing closer to the home islands. Meanwhile, Allied operations in the Burma theater were being reorganized. The British Army was now planning a counter-offensive with the aim of recapturing Burma. In March 1943, Imperial General Headquarters established a new Burma Area Army to bolster Burmese defenses. Lieutenant General Masakazu Kawabe was appointed commander. Before taking up his post, Kawabe paid a visit to an old friend, General Hideki Tojo, the Prime Minister. The two had graduated together at the prestigious Army War College. Looking to put Japan back on the offensive, Tojo set his eyes on Burma. In a series of calculated moves, Burma was granted its independence. This was in part designed to inspire the laggard freedom movement in neighboring India. The strategy also included the formation of a separate Indian National Army to put added pressure on the British. We located an audio recording of one of Kawabe's subordinates. He tells of how Tojo intended to turn around the worsening war situation. Mutaguchi, meanwhile, had been promoted to commander of the 15th Army assigned to the Burma Area Army. He now had a change of heart and began to aggressively push for an invasion of India.
This was the Daigoni's wish to Mutaguchiさんが耳にしたわけですね。何としてでもじゃあ大本営のやってみようというような、それがもう村口さんが何としてでもやりたい。
インパール攻略に成功すれば堅固なる防衛線を構築する、こういうのが一般の計画でございます。しかしながらインドに対する政略的効果を強く期待していた私は自ら陣頭に立ってこの方面による戦闘全般の形勢を好転することができるだろうと思ったのであります。
As consensus grew among the army's top brass, all opposing opinions were swept aside. Mutaguchi's immediate subordinate, Chief of Staff Nobuyoshi Obata, was among those who were not convinced. Obata's daughter remembers his reluctance. Obata was one of the army's few logistics specialists. He left behind many albums detailing life in the military. Logistics refers to the range of functions regarding troop support, including transport, supply, and communication. Obata advised Mutaguchi that from a logistics standpoint, the operation was risky at best. His commander countered with a reprimand, calling Obata passive. Just 1 month and a half after being promoted, he was dismissed.
I was posted to Burma as Chief of Staff of the 15th Army. But my views on strategy differed from those of Commander Mutaguchi. Eventually, I was demoted and left Burma.
Mutaguchi and Kawabe moved towards executing the plan. Kawabe was Mutaguchi's commanding officer during the Marco Polo Bridge incident in China. He let it be known to those around him that all operational planning would be conducted by Mutaguchi. Kawabe, who had the support of Prime Minister Tojo, put complete faith in his subordinate. Supreme Commander of the Southern Army, Hisaichi Terauchi, was also in agreement. However, reservations emerged at Imperial General Headquarters in Tokyo. A number of senior staff felt that priority should be given to Burmese defenses. Final authorization was issued by Chief of Army General Staff Gen Sugiyama. A senior officer recalled Sugiyama's reasoning.
Chief of Army General Staff Sugiyama urged me to change my mind, saying it's Terauchi's first wish, so please see to it somehow. Due to their close ties, I deferred to Sugiyama's judgment.
One by one, staff officers at headquarters added their approval. On January 7, 1944, the Imphal operation was given the go-ahead. Relationships within the army had prevailed over rational judgment, with devastating consequences.
Maymyo, present-day Pin Uluin in central Myanmar. This summer resort area developed during the British colonial period. Mutaguchi established the 15th Army headquarters here. The headquarters building has been left as it was during that period. NHK was given special permission to film the interior, a privilege never before granted. February 1944. A recent graduate in Army administration was assigned to the operation. "23-year-old Second Lieutenant Hirokuni Saito served under Mutaguchi in the 15th Army. In the building, we found journals and notes that Saito had been compiling. These valuable records tell of everything that went on within the headquarters.
Lieutenant General Mutaguchi would often tell us at lunch in the officers' residence, "It was I who started the Marco Polo Bridge incident. It was my responsibility to put an end to the Greater East Asia War."
Images of the headquarters at the time. Senior officers discuss strategies. All opposing arguments or reasoning were swiftly suppressed.
Even the administrative officer made it clear that resupplying is absolutely impossible. Everyone shouted out, "You coward! Where is your Yamato spirit?" All we could do was obey.
The Imphal operation was conceived as a quick, decisive battle of 3 weeks ahead of the seasonal monsoon. 90,000 soldiers would take part, centering on 3 divisions organized within the 15th Army. The 33rd Division would attack from the south, with the 15th Division coming in from the north. The 31st Division aimed to capture the northern city of Kohima in order to further isolate Imphal. But first, the men had to cross the large Chindwin River and many mountains. They would cover as much as 470 kilometers on foot. A riverside village where the Japanese army was stationed. villager recalled what the soldiers were like before the operation was launched. The troops, expecting a quick, decisive battle, carried just 3 weeks' worth of provisions. Villagers remember soldiers distributing military scrip and procuring food.
La bule ko ka ta ka nyam de ran ka ji chi tha la bo mang lo e tha ko lo em chi de ha la ko to ko ta pi ta lo sa da la yu to da la pe ti me le lo yu an lo la sang lo la mal ti yu le.
Mutaguchi ordered the requisitioning of livestock for food and transport. He also instructed the men to confiscate any supplies from the enemy.
食料そのものが歩いてくれるのが欲しいと申しまして、私各師団に1万頭ずつ羊とヤギと牛もそう稽古をさせてやったのでございます。補給が至難なる作戦においては特に糧秣弾薬兵器といわゆる敵に漁によるということが絶対に必要である。砲弾なる作戦であればあるほど危険はつきものである。
March 8th, 1944. The Imphal operation commences. Before the soldiers lay the Chindwin River, spanning 600 meters in some places. Here is the crossing point where the troops and supplies departed. To avoid British air raids, it was carried out at night. It is believed that half the cattle were washed away. Looming ahead was the next obstacle, the Arakan Mountains, with many peaks over 2,000 meters high. These are newsreels taken of the army crossing the mountains. There were very few roads for vehicles. Trucks and cannons had to be dismantled and carried across. Tadao Yamada belonged to the Mountain Artillery Regiment. He recalls the unimaginable marching on poor roads along steep cliffs.
だいたい馬の背中に積むわけですけんな。ほんで大砲としては小さい方ですけんな。さっき全部分解してしもてですな。ほんで馬の背中へ4頭ぐらいの馬に積めると思うと思ったんですな。こんな急なところをこんな道をこう行くわけですな。ほんと馬が今度踏み外してですな。ほんで言うたら崖から転落したいうかな。
A village nestled in the mountains, 150 kilometers from Imphal. The Japanese army arrived here 1 week into the operation. The soldiers began trying to procure supplies.
Nutidade atung ekuni suba ni order da hujidi ekuni amu pura hawakan da atung tapuni ekuni.
A large-scale river crossing and march along steep and narrow mountain roads. The troops were exhausted before they even met the enemy. Two weeks after the operation was launched, the first large-scale battle between Japanese and British forces occurred in this area, 110 kilometers from Imphal. The 33rd Division headed for Imphal from the south. Villagers took us to a place that bore witness to a fierce battle. Remnants thought to be a Japanese tank. The 33rd Division was bombarded by heavy tank and machine gun fire. It was a major defeat, resulting in more than 1,000 casualties. Even now, horrific discoveries are being made.
I just thought to Lima, New York, over Matung, the oak, the Vietnam. The other ten or a paper out of the Tawilwaro, 10 take on better builder. That would take it.
The commander of the 33rd Division that suffered the incredible losses was Lieutenant General Genzo Yanagida. Yanagida was said to be in the international faction of the army. From the beginning, he was strongly opposed to the operation, calling it reckless. This cherished family heirloom was only granted upon graduation with honors from the prestigious Army War College. Yanagida addressed letters to his children immediately before going into battle. Our troops are really fighting well. With losses mounting, the commander strongly advised Mutaguchi to alter course, remarking, "It is impossible to capture Imphal in 3 weeks as planned."
I have not yet occupied the enemy base and have allowed one of the battalions an honorable death. I acknowledge that it is necessary to take appropriate measures as soon as possible, and will endure what is difficult to endure and dare to express my opinions.
Mutaguchi received a succession of pleas from the other divisions as well. His anger was known to reverberate throughout the headquarters building. We found this entry in Hirokuni Saito's records.
The arguing back and forth between the division commander and Commander Mutaguchi continued. Commander Mutaguchi responded, "Do the best you can, idiot."
Saito recorded the exchanges between Mutaguchi and staff officers.
Commander Mutaguchi asked the local commander, "About how much damage will there be?" To which he replied, "If 5,000 are killed, I think it can be taken." At first, I thought he was talking about killing 5,000 of the enemy, but what he meant was a loss of 5,000 in friendly divisions. He talks about the loss of our troops like it's squashing insects. I often heard commissioned officers from the Staff Officers Division say, "If you kill thousands of people, what can be taken?"
The Imphal operation was marred by a colossal failure in logistics planning. It also underestimated the military strength of the adversary, Britain. A huge amount of material examining the battle was recently found in the UK. Immediately after the war, Allied forces interrogated Japanese army leaders who had been involved. They targeted 17 people, including local commanders and staff. During this questioning, details were heard about a mission that held the key to winning or losing the Imphal operation. The Battle of Kohima. 17,000 soldiers of the 31st Division invaded this city to the north of Imphal. Mutaguchi offered his account of the battle.
We also collected certain information on Allied strength inside India, but I do not remember the exact figures obtained. By taking Kohima, with the cutting of the road, we could apply pressure by envelopment, and with further strengthening of this pressure, we could bring about the surrender of the garrison.
Exactly 3 weeks after the operation was launched, one unit of the 31st Division finally reached Kohima. However, British troop strength had greatly changed since the Burma retreat in the early stages of the war. Over 10 hours of archival footage remains, shot by the British Army, relating to the Imphal operation. The Japanese had expected a quick, decisive campaign, but the British carefully planned to draw them into a protracted battle by flying in supplies. Through Allied coordination, 250 tons of munitions, food and medicine were dropped on the front lines per day. Care for the wounded had also improved. The injured were now transported to a field hospital within an hour, resulting in a sizable effect on troop morale. Britain's aim was to use overwhelming firepower to stymie the Japanese, who were running short of weapons and ammunition with their limited supply lines.
The British Army was being transformed. They scientifically evaluated everything you could imagine. The nature of the Japanese soldier, what they ate, the best way of resupplying by air, the best vehicles to use on the roads, how to defeat malaria, how to fight in the monsoon. The last thing the British wanted or needed was another defeat.
Kotoku Sato was the commander of the 31st Division that attacked Kohima. He explained to interrogators the difficulty of sustaining the front-line battle.
By this time, the food supplies were almost expended. The supplies from depots along the Chindwin never arrived. The food position around Kohima became desperate.
Kohima, India, as it appears today. A resident who cooperated with the Japanese army remembers a patriotic song the soldiers often sang.
1、2、3、白地に赤く日の丸染めて美しや日本の旗は
A major intersection leading from Kohima to Imphal. And images that record the fighting there. The British Army fortified a position on the hill overlooking the intersection and rained down firepower on the 31st Division below. Kohima was supposed to be captured in 3 weeks. The battle here lasted 2 months, claiming over 3,000 lives.
I knocked down 40. Now, it's not a boast. We had anti-aircraft guns, and they're quite big ones, on our side, that could throw a shell 15 miles.
Former Second Lieutenant Ryo-e Hirayama took part in the Battle of Kohima. He gave assault orders to subordinates.
ここで失敗するのもお前そこで死ぬと言いながらお前こっから登ってあそこに爆弾投げてくれと脳の中から俺は生き残った、一番ワールドの方だ。
With a shortage of weapons and ammunition, soldiers were ordered to jump into the way of an enemy tank while holding an explosive.
攻撃やいうのはもう行けと言うたらもうあげたら死ぬのが分かっとって行くんですけどな。だけどもう死ぬもう9.9まで死ぬのが分かっとって行けと言ったらもうこれは行かないかんわけです。
Just before Yamada's turn came up, the order was cancelled. 10 fellow soldiers who had executed their attacks moments before all lost their lives. A town that suddenly became a war zone. Local people as well recall that terrible time. With defeats in the Pacific Mounting, news out of Kohima was reported spectacularly in Japan. Far away from the fighting, Mutaguchi was overseeing affairs in Meimyo. Newspaper reporters crowded into the headquarters. Former Second Lieutenant Norioki Yamazaki was responsible for arranging interviews with Mutaguchi.
Asai toかね、毎日とかいうそういう大きくやるところには非常にいいお話をする。とにかく国の人たちが「おおやった日本はやった」とこういう景気にやらないかんと。ね、嘘でもいいと。
The British Army collected letters from fallen Japanese soldiers and had them translated. As the men prepared to charge into battle, they wrote to their loved ones back home. None of the letters reached their intended destinations.
In the trenches, I have neglected you for a long time. I don't think I shall return home alive. If I am killed, you are free to live your own life as you please. I sincerely hope that you will be happy with your family in the future.
The Imphal operation was a reckless endeavor that somehow overlooked the British Army's strength and efficient logistics. For the Japanese survivors, the real hell still lay ahead of them. Unable to reach their intended target, they faced a long and arduous retreat. Their greatest fears were realized with the onset of the seasonal monsoon. One by one, the soldiers collapsed from hunger and illness.
このままの図は人間が立って歩いている図はハギタがもかかってこないでも転んでしまえばダメな、いきなり飛びついてくるせいのハギタが
一緒に連れてってくれってこう言ったわけです。だから悪いけどよ、俺たちはまだこっちにね悪いことしたなって、申し訳なかったんです。もう本当にね、それいつもね、肉切って食われちゃうよ。日本人同士でね、殺してさ、その肉を持ってブツブツ交換とか金でね、そんな軍隊だった。それがインパル戦で。
The Battle of Imphal claimed nearly 30,000 Japanese lives. More than half that number met their end on this retreat from hell. In 1944, Japanese and British forces faced off near the border region separating present-day Myanmar and India. The Battle of Imphal is considered the most reckless operation by the Japanese in all of World War II. A military operation that planned for a short decisive battle of 3 weeks dragged on for several months. Due to poor logistical planning, soldiers succumbed to disease and starvation.
日本は神の国であって戦争には負けることないかけてるんじゃと言っておりましたけどな、まあ神がどこの国であったのか知らんけど、そういうことは絶対になかったと思いました。
Imperial General Headquarters in Tokyo, the highest command body of the Japanese army. Relationships within the army pecking order took priority over rational judgment. Tasked with seeing the operation through was Lieutenant General Renya Mutaguchi. His aggressive measures resulted in a tragic outcome. Second Lieutenant Hirokuni Saito served under Mutaguchi. Saito left behind journals and notes that reveal every action of the local army headquarters.
Commander Mutaguchi asked the local commander, "About how much damage will there be?" To which he replied, "If 5,000 are killed, I think it can be taken." At first, I thought he was talking about killing 5,000 of the enemy. But what he meant was a loss of 5,000 in friendly divisions. He talks about the loss of our troops like it's squashing insects. I often heard commissioned officers from the Staff Officers Division say, "If you kill thousands of people, what can be taken?"
Overwhelmed by the might and organization of the British Army, the Japanese soldiers awaited the inevitable.
Honorable parents, I apologize for not fulfilling my filial duties. I will obtain a splendid place to die and depart happily. I will leave not one fragment of bone behind. I regret not seeing my younger brothers and sisters grow up. A sense of serenity has come over me regarding my fate.
July 2017. An annual memorial is held in central Japan for those who perished in the Burma theater in World War II. Japanese casualties in the Imphal operation totaled 70,000, including 30,000 dead. Those who made it back home have only had harsh words for the top brass. NHK found a recording in which an officer involved in the operation details its organizational failures. Major Masaru Ushiro of the Burma Area Army Ushiro was in charge of logistics for the entire Burma theatre. He made the remark in his later years. One month into the operation, Ushiro visited the 15th Army, commanded by Mutaguchi, to confirm the status of supplies. Ushiro telegrammed his superiors that the operation was in serious trouble. However, Imperial General Headquarters ignored the warning, saying, "Those who express weak opinions are our greatest enemy."
私はもう分からんところは第一線の文法を全部見る第一線まで行って直接聞いて資料を集めてるんです。もう誤らした一番大きな原因でしょう。村口さんがもうやめたいと思ってもやめられない。方面の司令部としてもやめようと思ってもやめられないいう状態が起こった。
Imperial General Headquarters never properly reviewed the reality on the ground. Once the Imphal operation commenced, they insisted on its completion. New information concerning this line of thinking was recently found in the UK. In mid-May of 1944, a high-level meeting of army officials was held in Tokyo. A member of the top brass had just returned from a tour of inspection of Burma.
Shortly after Lieutenant General Hatta commenced his oral report, he stated his estimation of the situation as follows. The Imphal operation stands little chance of success. Immediately, General Tojo stopped his speech and changed the subject. A slight chill fell over the room. General Hatta had completed about half of his report.
The following day, General Hideki Tojo, who held the post of Prime Minister, deleted any reference to the meeting in his report to the Emperor.
In the current situation, we are barely able to maintain our supply lines. We believe we must endeavor to accomplish the established policy with unyielding spirit and all measures possible.
Ushiro recalled the subsequent atmosphere in the army following his memo on the Imphal operation.
The Burma Theatre. 2 months into the operation. With the worsening situation, Mutaguchi put the blame on his commanders in the field. He resorted to extreme measures, eventually dismissing all 3. Mutaguchi moved the 15th Army headquarters near the Burma-India border. This is what remains of it. The field hospital here overflowed with wounded from the front. "23-year-old Second Lieutenant Hirokuni Saito served under Mutaguchi. He wrote about the commander's unusual manner.
Our mornings would begin with the sorting of the dead on the road. Commander Mutaguchi would start each day at headquarters with the recitation of a victory prayer. "Let us conquer Imphal," he would say in a trance-like state.
Mutaguchi even traveled to the front lines himself. He took temporary control of the 33rd Division, which aimed at Imphal from the south.
I made plans to turn the tide of war at a single blow by moving up the Army's command post to the front lines, as well as employing all troops that could be mustered to this area.
However, this tactical direction pressing the advance was just as the British Army expected. William Slim was the commander of the 14th Army, intent on recapturing Burma.
I decided we should fight the Japanese when the precarious line of communication was behind them. If he had failed by the monsoon to occupy the Imphal area, he would be in an impossible supply position.
"15 kilometers from Imphal, the 33rd Division tried to overcome British defenses atop this hill. Due to the carnage of battle here, it is called Red Hill. Two months into the Imphal operation, the Japanese army was already sapped of its strength. Mutaguchi mustered the remaining units and continued ordering the men to advance even 100 meters in a total assault. Wave after wave was repulsed by overwhelming firepower. In just over a week, at least 800 had lost their lives.
자판기지 액대 생각하다가 발동 넣으면 그런 거 같아. 뭐냐 농아라게 뒤에 좀 시엔다. 농민이 애플.
빨리 먹으려니 코코넛 엑스텐더.
곰질리시에 노이라 그래 우리시지. 실내들이 아니라 하비나 다저로.
A battle logbook splattered with blood and soil. It was kept by Warrant Officer Masanori Yamakawa, who was killed in action here. The 28-year-old was responsible for recording meritorious deeds and the circumstances under which the men died. The journal lists the tragic final moments of each soldier. Hit by shrapnel, he died, saying, "I failed." Hearing a cry, "Someone please come," he went to an injured soldier's side. The two died together in the trench.
사용은 스타버리스트 오스만 난다던 것 같아. 이거 족사이다나. 이소토노 그노 토세노 도리다 아리다나 그 나니가 무작사뜨나 한 적이다네. 사용은 그러네. 무사다뜨나네.
かわいそうだとかなんとか天皇陛下万歳言う人は少ないですから。天皇陛下万歳。大概お母さんの名前。その次はお母さんいない人はお父さんの名前を呼んで済んできますね。
For the few who survived Red Hill, the memories do not fade.
おい、元気か？俺は元気にやってるぜ。毎日お前をお参りしてるから、もう死んだらと思ってないよ。生きてると思ってるから。インパール選手、石田忠吉野光一、石原宏、塚越義人。
Just over 40 survived in Koguchi's unit. 460 were killed in action.
顔がね、もうこう痛いっつって言ってる顔が忘れるんです。おい、拳やられたって言われた時にね、やっぱりね、思い出したじゃん、涙出しますね。
The closing days of May 1944. The Japanese army now faced yet another fearful obstacle, the monsoon. The amount of rainfall in this area is said to be the world's highest. Analyzing data from that time, NHK found that the total rainfall for the month of May topped 1,000 millimeters. It was a once in every 30 years deluge. This map shows the soldiers killed in action. 3 months into the operation that was expected to take 3 weeks, nearly 10,000 had perished. Mutaguchi nevertheless continued to send rousing telegrams to his commanders in the field.
The onset of the monsoon will be on the side of the Imperial Army. We should fight bravely to the end.
Meanwhile, Kohima had devolved into a war of attrition. Commander of the 31st Division, Kotoku Sato, repeatedly sent word to headquarters requesting reinforcements.
The 15th Army's promises to resupply us were complete nonsense.
Mutaguchi labeled Sato's demands as whining.
佐藤の野郎はやね、食うものがない、撃つ弾がない、これでは戦争できないっていうような電報を汚すと。食わず飲まずね、弾がなくても戦うのが皇軍である。それをその泣き言を言うてくると。
The exchanges between front line and headquarters grew increasingly heated.
The division is short of food, while heavy munitions have run out altogether. We will withdraw from Kohima by June 1st at the latest to a site where we can receive supplies.
It is difficult to agree to your division abandoning Kohima due to supply troubles. In addition, you must secure your position for 10 days. That being the case, our forces will capture Imphal and reinforce your division with the main military force. I will reward your troops for their meritorious service to date.
With no dispatch of staff to this important area and no reinforcements, and just as there is no understanding of the actual situation regarding the amount of sick and wounded, please be aware that, depending on the situation, the division commander will take action at his own discretion.
On June 1st, nearly 3 months into the operation, Sato ordered his men to withdraw. Never before in the history of the Japanese army had a division commander made such an important decision without permission from above. A division commander oversaw about 20,000 troops. It was a key post, appointed directly by the emperor. That an officer of this rank would ignore the supreme command was a major incident that shook the imperial army organization to its core. June 5th, 1944. Masakazu Kawabe, commander of the Burma Area Army, visited Mutaguchi near the front lines to discuss the operation's feasibility. Though both felt success was slipping away, superior and subordinate spent the entire time making small talk.
Although I felt a sudden urge to report bluntly that the success of the operation was questionable at that time, my good sense restrained me from expressing such a grave announcement.
However, we kept them from each other and encouraged each other to exert desperate efforts to direct the operation to success. The reason was that the accomplishment of the assigned mission was the absolute principle of the Army.
The two's refusal to accept the reality on the ground doomed many thousands more to a terrible fate. Imperial General Headquarters finally aborted the operation on July 1st. Nearly 4 months had passed since its launch. However, the tragedy of the Battle of Imphal was about to take a terrible turn. Blue indicates the number of Japanese who perished during the retreat. 60% of the dead actually succumbed after the operation was called off.
The 33rd Division defeated in the savage fighting around the Red Hill area. Survivors were forced to withdraw in heavy rain under enemy attack. Red indicates those killed during the operation, blue after it was called off. The 400-kilometer avenues of retreat led toward the Chindwin River. The British Army kept up its pursuit. One of the routes taken in the retreat. Men collapsed one after another. Soon the roadside was littered with the dead and dying. British Army images captured the scene of the retreating 33rd Division. The dead lying exposed to the elements. Decay in all its forms setting in. The experience was branded into the memories of the pursuing British.
And thousands of Japanese soldiers, they just committed suicide, basically. They jumped over the side to jump them there, right down there, bang, they was gone. And they must be still finding bodies after all these long years, with a vast number of Japanese soldiers in retreat.
Kikutaro Mochida sustained a serious leg injury, escaping the British Army's pursuit. He was forced to abandon his fellow soldiers.
一緒に連れてってくれってこいつわけです。ああいいよっつって簡単に言ったんだけども、5メートル歩け休み、5メートル歩け休み、これじゃねこっちがとても持たないから、ね、こんなことしたらこっちは参っちゃうが、だから悪いけどよ、俺たちはまだこっちにね悪いことしたなって。申し訳なかったんです。もう本当にね、それいつもね。
The soldiers, cursing their fate, called this route of retreat the Road of Bones. The rate of decay advanced due to the heavy rain, turning corpses into bones in a mere 10 days. With the end of the mission, Mutaguchi left the area ahead of his 15th Army. He was relieved of his command and returned to Japan. Second Lieutenant Hirokuni Saito, who served under Mutaguchi and recorded the words, "If 5,000 are killed, I think it can be taken." He contracted malaria on the front line and fell behind.
The rain doesn't let up in the jungle. Gasping for breath, I walk 10 meters, then rest. If I manage 20 meters, I slump down. The bodies on the side of the road hint at my fate.
With the onset of the monsoon, disease spread rapidly among the weakened survivors. The death toll continued to rise. In the end, about half of the dead from the Imphal operation perished from sickness and starvation. Meanwhile, the 31st Division in the north began its own unauthorized withdrawal due to lack of reinforcements. Believing there to be a supply depot further south, they stumbled along a steep mountain path. Hope soon turned to despair when no food was found.
硬い鑑定攞嘢冇是壞特事，就係你馬獻。就呢獻嘅呢個。佢會自獻，好得個第三嘢，會自。
Squad leader Tetsuo Sato wandered through the mountains with his troops. Many times he witnessed men fall prey to wild animals in the jungle.
Jingeno kudiru dogo wa aru yo, atta yo. 2回も3回もそれを見ることあったの。萩高もそうだよ。ほらもう車の図は人間が立って歩いている図は萩高もかかってこないんだもん。転んでしまえばダメな。いきなり飛びついてくるせいの萩高。
A mess kit brought home from the battlefield by Koichi Mochizuki, who was in the medical unit. Men would soon abandon their weapons before even considering leaving their cooking gear behind. Mochizuki has taken to drawing the things he witnessed on the battlefield. Most of his works depict his fellow suffering comrades. It's terrible when there is nothing to eat. Men resorted to eating the flesh of their fellow soldiers. They exchanged it and sold it.
Meat 切って食われてるやん。日本人同士でね殺してたその肉を持ってブツブツ交換とかねそれだけ落ちぶれてたわけで日本軍がねとにかく友軍の肉を切って取ってブツブツ交換したり売り行ったりでね何かしたってそんな軍隊だったわな、ね、それがインパル戦で。
The Chindwin River, which the men had crossed in early March, had now become a raging current with the monsoon. 30% of the dead were concentrated on the banks of the river. After finally exiting the Road of Bones, a large turbid mass lay before the desperate, weary soldiers.
雨どんどんね幅あるでそんなのが当たるわけね体が浮いちゃうからね焦りだよやっぱね何にもないだから食べ物がなし船もなしいつ渡れるか分かんないただこれじゃ死んだけだろう
Tadao Yamada belonged to the 31st Division's Mountain Artillery Regiment. He found the name of one of his fellow soldiers and told us of his final moments.
病死して辛いな。いや、病死やな。けんどこれはまあ病死言うたら病死かもしれんけど、これはまあ自殺みたいなもんよ。剣を心臓にぶち込んだんだけどな。ぶち込んだってそのぶち込むじゃんいうのはもう力もなかったけどな剣を上向けといてなで自分の体を上に乗せたんだよ。やけんもあっという間だったわいな。けんどがこれは私も実際のことは、絶対いい話なんだよ。お母さんがおったけんなかわいそうなけんな。だけんそれはそんなことも言われん病気死んだぐらいしか言えばなんだよ。
Hirokuni Saito was left behind on the retreat. Near the Chindwin River, he teetered on the edge of death.
July 26th. If I die, a passing soldier will straightway strip me naked and tear off every piece of equipment, down to my loincloth, and take it away. It is a scene of carnage. To survive, it doesn't matter whether you're comrades or not. A soldier says that even if you eat a dead body, your stomach will fill up. In the camps where the wounded lay, it's said that they offer a final serving of hardtack as well as small bullets or hand grenades to those who pose a hindrance. They've made more than 700 commit suicide. Those who don't die are killed by members on duty. I shall die in a way that is not shameful.
Just how many were able to make it across is not known. There is no record in Japan's official military history.
The Imphal operation is considered the most reckless for the Japanese in World War II. The casualty count as many as 70,000. The final death toll, approximately 30,000. How did the military's upper echelons face up to this fact? General Hideki Tojo was forced to resign as prime minister after the fall of Saipan. This was around the same period as the Battle of Imphal. However, army leaders directly involved in the operation escaped serious accountability. Field Marshal Gen Sugiyama, Chief of Army General Staff at Imperial General Headquarters when the operation was decided. He became Army Minister upon Tojo's ousting. Field Marshal Hisaichi Terauchi, Supreme Commander of the Southern Army. He kept his post until the war's end. Lieutenant General Masakazu Kawabe, Commander of the Burma Area Army. He was promoted to General in March 1945 and took up the position of Air General Army Commander. Lieutenant General Renya Mutaguchi, Commander of the 15th Army. 1 month after retiring to a reserve role, he was appointed head of the Military Academy Preparatory School. Lieutenant General Kotoku Sato of the 31st Division was relieved of command for carrying out an unauthorized withdrawal. After that, he held a lesser military post. Later, he planned to expose the upper echelon's responsibility for the Imphal debacle in a court-martial.
The Stupid Quadruple. Imperial General Headquarters, the Southern Army, the Area Army, and the 15th Army brought about the tragedy of Imphal.
Fearing that accountability could extend to the military's core, army officials handed down a diagnosis of insanity, and all charges were dropped. Imperial General Headquarters in Tokyo, the highest command body of the Japanese Army. The Imperial Army Order approving the Imphal operation reveals the stamps of many senior officers from headquarters. One of those belonged to Takushiro Hattori from the operations section. When interrogated by the British, he was asked the following: what section of Japanese higher command undertook the detailed planning of the operation?
As regards India, however, there was never at any time any planning for a territorial invasion in terms of a separate large-scale campaign. An offensive against Imphal and Kohima were left to the appropriate field formations, such an offensive being considered more as existing operational responsibilities of those formations than as a new commitment by Imperial Headquarters.
Among the possessions of Renya Mutaguchi in his later years was this book. The author was A.J. Barker, a lieutenant colonel in the British Army engaged in the Burma theatre. The two even exchanged letters. Mutaguchi felt that Barker acknowledged his overall objectives in the book. By then over 70 years of age, the old warrior went to the National Diet Library in Tokyo and left his own record of events.
終戦後19年間私は苦しみ抜いて日本国内で歌うちのバカ野郎バカ野郎でもって全ての雑誌でも戦記簿にも戦えておったんですよ。 それがバーカーのように私は神さんのお告げじゃないかというぐらいにこのバーカーの手紙を喜びます。私ども戦争当事者として取った作戦の方針並びに指導なりが時期に適調していたことが事実に調して証拠立てられ、その証拠立てられた場合、その喜びはいかなるものであるかをお察し願いたい。
Former Lieutenant General Renya Mutaguchi passed away in 1966. He was 77 years old. By virtue of the Imphal operation, fierce fighting took place in the border regions separating India and Myanmar. In Kohima, a cathedral was built in memory of the victims. Those terrible days have not been forgotten.
My theme is that war is a destroyer of human lives. It is a destroyer of human relations, destroyer of reason and justice. It is a very cruel giant. It kills everything. So we should never support war.
Over 7 decades have passed since the Battle of Imphal. But for the men who made it home to Japan, their questions remain unanswered.
戦争のさっていうのは結局まあ言うたら殺し合い子ですけどな、まあ殺し合い子で普通人殺したりしたら大変な罰を受けるわけですけどな、まあ戦争でやったら一人でも殺したことがいいということで戦争ぐらい馬鹿げたことはない。
平和は乱しちゃダメだ。平和を乱さんためにどうやって生き抜いていく、平和な生活を続けて生きてくれると拝むだけで僕の力だ。そんなもん。
Second Lieutenant Hirokuni Saito, who served under Mutaguchi and recorded the reply, "If 5,000 are killed, I think it can be taken." At war's end, Saito was captured by Allied forces and returned to Japan in 1946. He later married and raised a family. In all that time, he never talked about the war.
あんまり見たくないと思ってあんまりねああいっぱい
So many years ago, teetering on the verge of death, a 23-year-old far from home wrote of the hell that surrounded him.
A person who died exhausted, with one leg thrust into the mud. Bodies in pools of water, yet take no drink. That reminds me, with many soldiers and other Japanese all around. Certainly, officers and non-commissioned officers weren't dying.
日本の軍人がこれだけ死ねばそれを利用して自分たちが計画した戦が成功しただから日本の軍隊の上層部が悔しいけれど兵隊に対する考えはそんなもんです。だから死者は嫌いですね。
The sorrow as a survivor is deeper and lonelier than the grief for those who died. I have doubts about the philosophy of the nation's leadership. To fight a hopeless battle, is there any greater tragedy in this world?